Good afternoon, class. This is Professor Hill Cook, and today we're going to go over chapter 7, 8, and 9, which is the chapters that you should have read already, and which is what your next exam is over in the next couple of weeks. But anyway, chapter 7 is called the judicial branch. What is the judicial branch? As you know, it is the third branch of government. Remember, we talked about the first two, which was legislative branch and executive branch. This is our third branch, which is the judicial branch. Judges must remain independent of a political party. Well, we know that's not currently true. Our Supreme Court at this juncture does not seem to be independent of a political party. It seems to lean a little bit more right and conservative than what I'm most comfortable with. Judges must also determine which acts are not constitutional, not create, but make things, but based on what our Constitution currently says, they are to determine whether or not it's constitutional or not. So the power of a judicial review to review the laws of the land and determine their constitutionality. And so when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was challenged in the Supreme Court in Shelby versus Holder, there were some things about it in terms of constitutionality. The Affordable Care Act that continues to be challenged and will be seen before this very Supreme Court next week to determine its constitutionality. In the midst of a pandemic, the party in power wants to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, which would have impact on millions of people, and those millions of, almost 9 million people now who have contracted coronavirus, and the millions that have survived it will now have pre-existing conditions, which would go away with insurance having to provide coverage without the Affordable Care Act. So judicial power weighs a lot in terms of how our laws are interpreted. So we have three structures of court, how our courts are structured. There's three levels of federal court. You have Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and your district courts. So what's been interesting during this administration and the previous administration is that the president nominates the judges' appointments, and then the Senate has to approve them. Well, during Obama's second term, and even some of his first term, once the Republicans took over the House and the Senate, they refused to have hearings on a number of his judicial appointments. And so they left those seats open for years, 4 or 5 years, those seats were open. And so the reason why this administration has been able to appoint so many judges is because the senators in Congress elected to leave all those positions open in hope that one day they'll have the power, and they do. And so he's appointed over 200 and some odd judges. None of them has been a person of color, I don't believe. About 85% of them have been men, white men. There might be one on a district level, but a black female, but I definitely don't think there's been a black male that he as in Trump, has nominated for a judicial position. And so the Supreme Court, as we know, is the highest court in the land. Last week, they jammed through, actually it was this week, seemed like this week's lasted forever, the newest Supreme Court justice to take the seat of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that passed away. A judicial nominee to the Supreme Court has never happened so quickly in the history. The need for them to rush that through when President Obama in January of 2016 had a nomination, and their reasoning for not even having a hearing on Merrick Garland was because they as in the Republicans stated that it was an election year and that the people should decide who the next Supreme Court justice should be based on who the president was going to be. So that's interesting that 4 years ago, that was their argument back in January. And yet people had already started voting this year when Justice Ginsburg passed away. And it was within months of an election. And so it's just amazing the hypocrisy of the Republican Party when it wants to be. and the power that it wields and the rules change based on who's in power. And that's not how our democracy is supposed to work. But the Supreme Court only hears a few cases, and all of the cases that go to the Supreme Court happen at an appeal, comes from the appeals court. So before you get to the Supreme Court, there are steps to get to the Supreme Court. As stated, the Supreme Court justices are appointed by the president. They're approved by the Senate. They're lifetime terms, which means they're there for the rest of their lives. That's been questionable now. If you have someone in their 30s that's going to the Supreme Court, they'll be there for 40 some odd years, which could have a great impact on our society. They are only in session from October to June. So they are now back in session. They are ruling on some things that have come before them just recently on some voting issues in some different states. The names listed currently that you will see on your slide of the judges are not the most current. Number 2, Anthony Kennedy is no longer there, and neither is, of course, number 6, Ruth Ginsburg. She's no longer there either. And there's another one that's not there, and I want to say it's Alito. So, yes, because Trump has appointed 3 justices since he's been in office, which is interesting. The Court of Appeals, another name for that is circuit courts. That's 12. There are 12 courts. If you have a case that goes to the appellate court, no new evidence can be submitted. It's really just having another judge look at the same evidence that was presented prior. This is also positions that are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate, and they too are lifetime positions. District courts are your trial courts. That's where your criminal and civil cases are heard. That's where a case goes the first time. If you lose a case here and you appeal it, then you will go to that next level, which is the district courts phase. And every state has at least one court, at least one district court. The state of Texas has 4. The state of Texas has 4 district courts. These judges are appointed by the president and are there for life as well. What is a grand jury? You hear that a lot when you're dealing with police brutality cases. They take something to the grand jury, and what the grand jury decides is whether or not if the case can be brought to trial. So you'll hear evidence that the grand jury decided not to indict. Well, that means they decided that however the prosecutors presented the case, they presented the case in such a way that they didn't feel like anybody should be held accountable. Most recently has what happened in Kentucky with Breonna Taylor's case, and how the Attorney General presented the case. We're finding out now from some of the jurors is that they didn't get all the information, because had they got the information, they would have given a different ruling. Some of the criteria for being a Supreme Court justice: you should have a law degree. Most of the time they come from a very prestigious school. You should have some judicial experience. Usually that's on a federal level. Their average age is about 50. There hasn't been, the first female was Sandra Day O'Connor back in 1981. And the first African American period was Thurgood Marshall back in 1971. So Sandra Day O'Connor came in 1981. Thurgood Marshall was in 1971. So what happens in the Supreme Court is that they'll hear a case, they'll listen to the motions, the people will come before them and argue the case. Each side has 30 minutes to present. Then the justices go off, they talk about it, and they discuss it for a couple of days, and then they come back and they write an opinion. What you'll often hear is when this most recent case, it was a 4-3 decision, I think, I can't remember. And so you'll hear from one of the judges that went against it. That's called the dissent. So you'll hear a dissenting opinion that's written by one of the justices, and then you'll also hear from the majority. So in that case, the Chief Justice, which is John Roberts, usually assigns who writes the opinions on a particular case. So the Supreme Court is supposed to be a check and balance. There should be internal checks. It should not have any influence on the president, and the president should not have any influence on the court. Not real sure how that's holding up. congressional checks, although Congress cannot reverse a decision, they can go ahead on and rewrite a law and redo another law. So if in the event that, let's say next week when they have the case, week after next when the Affordable Care Act goes before the Supreme Court, and let's say the Supreme Court decides they're going to declare the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, the role of Congress at that time would be to rewrite another law, and hopefully it would get passed by both the House and the Senate and then signed into law by whoever the current president is. So that's what Congress can do. They can't reverse a decision because the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land, but they can impeach some judges, and they can also pass a similar bill that might answer the question better than the first one did. So that's our judicial system. As stated, it is supposed to be nonpartisan. It is supposed to not lean one way or the other, but it is currently. It's 5-4 right now. Actually, it's 6-3 right now. 6 more conservative judges and 3 more liberal judges. So that is why there's been a lot of concern around healthcare, around women's rights, around gay rights, a lot of those things. And what we need to remember is that a lot of the rights that we have, especially people of color and women, was won in the judicial system. The fact that we can go to the same schools now was won in the Supreme Court with Brown versus Board of Education. The fact that we have interracial marriage was won in the Supreme Court with Loving versus Virginia, I believe. And so when you think about it, the Supreme Court and our court systems are very important. So if you're out there voting and you see some judges' names on there, I'm hoping that you're doing some research about them. On a local level and a state level, our judges are elected. They're not appointed, they're elected. So we have some say in the state of Texas and who sits on our Texas Supreme Court. So the fact that Greg Abbott can declare not to have enough ballot drop boxes in Harris County, which is the largest county in the state of Texas, and have a Supreme Court accept that, is because the majority of them are conservative as well. And so those are the things that have an impact on your day-to-day life. And so that's why it is so important that you pay attention to all those things that are happening.